It's the spring of 1861 and the United States is tearing itself apart. Southern states are attacking one another, and in Maryland, a state that surrounds Washington, on all sides, mobs are attacking the Union troops practically in the streets. The railway lines are being sabotaged, and there's a very real fear that the capital of the US itself could be cut off or overrun. And in the middle of this crisis, Abraham Lincoln makes a decision that still divides historians to this very day to save the Union and save democracy itself. He suspends one of the most basic rights in the entire Constitution, the right to a fair hearing before you're thrown in jail. Was it necessary? Was it legal? And what does it say about how far a leader can go to protect a democracy, even if it means bending the very rules that clearly define it? Well, let's get into it and understand why Lincoln does this, because really we need to take a step back and understand exactly in this moment how fragile the situation really is. In Washington D.C. sits below the Mason-Dix line, surrounded by slave states. Maryland alone has enough pro-Confederate sentiments that if it succeeds, the capital is completely cut off from the rest of the Union, surrounded on all sides by hostile territory. And in April of 1861, a Massachusetts regiment marching through Baltimore is attacked by a pro-secession mob. Shots are fired, soldiers and civilians are both killed. Railroad bridges leading into the city are burned to stop more troops from arriving. And Lincoln is here watching a state on the edge of tearing away. And if it does, Washington itself might fall before the war even properly begins. So, Lincoln makes his move. He authorizes military commanders to suspend what's called the writ of Habeas Corpus, a legal principle that goes back centuries in English and American law, and it says that the government cannot imprison you indefinitely without bringing you before a judge. It's one of the oldest protections against tyranny in the entire world legal system, and Lincoln, the president, who will later be remembered as one of history's great defenders of liberty, suspends it. But really, what does that mean in practice? Well, it really means that the Union soldiers can now arrest suspected Confederate sympathizers, saboteurs, and agitators in Maryland and hold them in custody without any trial, without any formal charges, sometimes without any clear timeline for a release. One of the men arrested is John Merryman, a Maryland militia officer accused of helping to destroy those railroad bridges. He's arrested and held in Fort McHenry with no trial and no hearing. Merryman's lawyers appeal directly to the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, Roger Taney, and Taney doesn't hesitate. He simply rules that only Congress and not the President has the constitutional and official legal authority to suspend habeas corpus. He orders Maryland released, and he orders Merryman to be released. And here's the moment that should stop you in your tracks. President Lincoln ignores the ruling. The military commander at the fort, acting under Lincoln's authority, refuses to produce Merryman in court. The President of the United States is openly defying a direct order from the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Think about what that really actually means here. One of the founding principles of the American democracy is that no single branch of government holds all power in its entirety. It's that the court can check the president, and the president cannot simply override a judge simply because he just disagrees. And in this moment, Lincoln does exactly that. So why does this become a suddenly full-blown constitutional crisis? Well, partly because the country is already in the middle of a much bigger one. And also because Lincoln makes his case directly to the public of America and to Congress, arguing something remarkably blunt, that if he lets the Union collapse by following every legal formality to the letter, there won't be a constitution left to protect anymore, and there will be no America. His exact reasoning, later put to Congress, comes down to a single question: should all the laws but one go unexecuted and the government itself go into pieces, lest that one law be violated? In other words, if the house is on fire, Do you refuse to break the window because breaking windows is technically against the rules? Well, it's a powerful argument, isn't it? It's also exactly the kind of argument every single leader who has ever expanded emergency powers has often made before or since. And President Lincoln does not stop here with Merryman. Over the course of this very bitter civil war in the US, an estimated 15 to 20,000 civilians are arrested under suspended Habeas Corpus protections. Newspapers that print pro-Confederate or anti-war content are now shut down. Editors are arrested, and in some cases, elected officials are suspected of disloyalty, and they are detained without trial. To Lincoln supporters, this is the harsh but necessary price of holding a fracturing nation simply together at the core. And to his critics then and now, there is a president using the cover of war to silence dissent and consolidate power in a way no American president ever had before. Eventually, in 1863, Congress passed the Habeas Corpus Suspension Act, formally giving Lincoln the authority he'd already been exercising unilaterally for the past 2 years. Congress, in effect, catches up to actions the president had already taken, which raises its own uncomfortable question about how democracies actually function under extreme pressures. Sometimes the rules get written after the fact to match what already happened. So here's where it gets complicated, and here's where I want you to sit with the tension of it for a second. Lincoln is, by nearly every historical measure, one of the presidents most responsible for preserving American democracy. Without the Union victory, there is a real argument here that the United States as we know it simply does not exist. And yet the path to that victory runs directly through jailing American citizens without trial and ignoring a Supreme Court order. Was it justified? Historians still argue about this. Some point out that the suspension was geographically limited, tied to active rebellion, and eventually refuted by Congress. A wartime emergency measure, not a permanent power grab. Others, on the other hand, argue that once a president decides he can ignore the courts when the stakes are high enough, well, then you've established a precedent that can be used again by leaders with far less noble intentions. But really what's undeniable here is this. Lincoln believed he was saving democracy by bending it completely. And for over a century and a half, Americans have been arguing about whether they have ever truly, possibly, suspended the real systems to protect the system. The rules were built to protect without changing what the system fundamentally is. It's a question that frankly doesn't stay in the past. Every time a government invokes an emergency power, it restricts civil liberties in the name of security, or acts first and asks legal permissions later. It's really replaying this exact same argument Lincoln made in 1861. Now, if you found this video interesting, make sure to drop me a like, comment below and subscribe for more videos, and I will see you on the next one.